a random act of kindness, or the beginning of something much darker? Before we start, join our YouTube family by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, let's get into the story. The old man didn't flinch when the coffee hit his face. It wasn't the first time. The cup came out of nowhere. Hot, bitter liquid splashing across his cheeks, dripping into his beard, soaking the torn collar of his coat. People nearby laughed. Not loudly, not openly, just enough to make sure he heard it. He wiped his face slowly, like it didn't matter. Like none of it mattered anymore. "Get a job," the guy muttered before walking off, adjusting his clean jacket like nothing had happened. The old man just stood there on the sidewalk, blinking against the sting. His hands trembled, but not from anger. That part of him had burned out a long time ago. What hurt wasn't the coffee. It was how normal this had become. Cars passed. Shoes clicked against pavement. Life moved on around him like he wasn't even there. And maybe he wasn't. He looked down at the paper cup in his hand. Empty. Crumpled slightly. Where his fingers pressed too hard. He sighed. "Well," he whispered to himself, voice dry and cracking. "Guess that's that." No one heard him. No one ever did. He turned away from the busy street and shuffled toward the alley he called home. It wasn't much. Just a narrow space between two brick buildings, where the wind cut sharp in the evenings and rats didn't bother hiding anymore. But it was quiet. Quiet was better. As he walked, people avoided eye contact. Some stepped around him like he was a puddle. Others glanced once, quickly, then looked away. Funny thing is, he remembered when people used to look at him differently. There was a time when strangers smiled. A time when his name actually meant something. A time when he wasn't just this. He reached the alley and lowered himself onto the flattened cardboard that served as his bed. His joints protested. Every movement felt heavier than the last. He leaned his head back against the cold brick wall and closed his eyes. For a second, just a second, he let himself remember. A warm kitchen. The smell of coffee. Real coffee, not thrown at him. Soft laughter. A woman's voice calling his name. "Thomas, you're going to be late again." He almost smiled. Almost. But then the memory slipped, like it always did. And reality came crashing back in. Cold, empty, silent. "Yeah," he muttered, staring at the gray sky above the alley. "Late for what now?" No answer. "Of course not." Hours passed. Maybe more. Time didn't move the same way anymore. It stretched when he was alone. Collapsed when he tried to hold on to it. By evening, the city lights flickered on, one by one, like stars trying too hard. Thomas pulled his coat tighter around himself, though it barely helped. The fabric was thin, worn at the edges, and smelled faintly of dampness. His stomach growled. He ignored it. Hunger was easier to deal with than hope. Hope? That was dangerous. Hope made you expect things. And expectations? They had a way of breaking you. He'd learned that the hard way. A faint noise echoed at the end of the alley. Footsteps. Thomas tensed slightly, eyes narrowing. Footsteps at this hour usually meant trouble. Teenagers looking for someone to mock. Drunks looking for someone weaker. Or worse, people who just didn't care what they did. He stayed still, hoping whoever it was would pass by. The footsteps slowed, then stopped, right at the entrance of the alley. Thomas exhaled quietly. "Just keep walking," he whispered under his breath. "Come on, just keep walking." But they didn't. Instead, the footsteps started again, coming closer, closer. Each step echoed against the brick walls, louder than it should have been. Thomas opened his eyes fully now, watching. A figure appeared at the edge of the dim light. Not a teenager, not stumbling like a drunk either. Just a person, standing there, watching him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thomas broke the silence first, his voice rough. "Look, I don't have anything worth taking." The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, hands in their pockets. Thomas felt that familiar knot tighten in his chest. "Here we go again." "Seriously," he added, a bit sharper now. "You're wasting your time." Still nothing. The figure stepped forward. One step, then another. And then Thomas noticed something strange. They weren't looking at him the way people usually did. No disgust, no pity, no quick glance followed by avoidance. Just looking, like he was actually there. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "All right," he muttered, trying to sound tougher than he felt. "You've seen enough. Move along." The figure finally spoke. "Rough day?" The voice was calm. Not mocking, not fake. Just calm. Thomas frowned. "What?" "I said," the person repeated, stepping a little closer into the light. "Rough day?" Thomas blinked. Of all the things he expected, that wasn't one of them. He let out a short, dry laugh. "You serious right now?" The person nodded slightly. Thomas shook his head. "Yeah," he said, voice heavy with sarcasm. "Best day of my life. Can't you tell?" For a second, there was silence again. Then the person did something that made Thomas freeze. They stepped fully into the alley and sat down, right across from him, on the cold ground. Like it didn't matter, like it was normal. Thomas stared. "What are you doing?" "Talking," the stranger said simply. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Why?" The stranger shrugged. "Because no one else is." That hit harder than the coffee ever could. Thomas looked away quickly, jaw tightening. "Yeah," he muttered. "Well, that's usually for a reason." "Is it?" Thomas didn't answer. The stranger leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on their knees. "What's your name?" Thomas hesitated. Names? They carried weight, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to carry his anymore. "Doesn't matter," he said finally. The stranger didn't push, just nodded. "All right. Then I'll tell you mine first." Thomas glanced up, confused. "Why would I care?" "Maybe you don't," the stranger said. "But it's only fair." A pause. Then, "My name's Daniel." Thomas blinked. Daniel. Simple. Normal. Real. He swallowed. "Thomas," he muttered, before he could stop himself. Daniel smiled slightly. "Nice to meet you, Thomas." Thomas scoffed. "Yeah, sure." But something felt off, not wrong, just unfamiliar. Daniel looked at him for a moment, studying his face. Not judging, just noticing. "You haven't eaten today, have you?" Thomas stiffened. "How would you know?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small paper bag. Set it gently on the ground between them. "I figured." Thomas stared at the bag, then at Daniel, then back at the bag. His stomach betrayed him with a low growl. He clenched his jaw. "I'm not a charity case." Daniel nodded. "I didn't say you were." "Then what is this?" "Food," Daniel said simply. Thomas hesitated. Pride and hunger fought a quiet war inside him. Hunger was winning. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached out. His fingers brushed the bag. Warm. Still warm. He opened it carefully. Inside, a sandwich. Nothing fancy, but it smelled like heaven. Thomas swallowed hard. Why?" he asked quietly, not looking up. Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was softer. "Because someone did the same for me once." Thomas froze. His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" Daniel leaned back slightly, eyes drifting for a moment, like he was remembering something far away. "I wasn't always doing okay," he said. "There was a time I was pretty close to where you are now." Thomas stared at him. "No, no way." He looked too clean, too put together, too normal. "You," Thomas said, disbelief clear in his voice. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, me." Thomas shook his head. "Don't mess with me." "I'm not." Silence settled between them again. But it felt different this time. Heavier. Thomas slowly took a bite of the sandwich. The taste hit him instantly. Real food. Warm. For a second, his eyes watered. He blinked it away quickly, chewing fast like someone might take it from him. Daniel didn't move, didn't interrupt. Just let him eat. And when Thomas finally slowed down, breathing a little easier, Daniel spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "What?" Daniel looked him straight in the eyes. Not through him, not around him, at him. "What happened to you?" Thomas's chest tightened. There it was, the question, The one people never really wanted the answer to. He let out a bitter chuckle. You got time? Daniel nodded. I've got all night. Thomas looked down at the half-eaten sandwich in his hands, then at his shaking fingers, then back at Daniel. For a long moment, he said nothing. Because the truth? The truth wasn't simple. It wasn't one bad decision, or one unlucky moment. It was a chain, a long, painful chain of things that slowly stripped him of everything, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. He took a deep breath. You really want to know? He asked quietly. Daniel didn't hesitate. I do. Thomas stared at him, trying to figure him out, trying to understand why this stranger, this Daniel, was sitting in a cold alley talking to someone like him. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But something inside him, something small, something he thought had died a long time ago, it stirred, just a little. All right, Thomas said finally, voice low. But don't say I didn't warn you. He looked up at the dark sky for a moment, then back at Daniel. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years. I used to have everything. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink, because something told him this wasn't just a story. This was a turning point. And as Thomas began to speak, neither of them realized that the truth he was about to reveal was far more dangerous than either of them were ready for. Thomas didn't start right away. He just sat there, staring at the sandwich like it held the words for him. You ever notice, he said slowly, voice rough, how people think it's just one mistake? Daniel stayed quiet. They look at someone like me, Thomas went on, and they think, yeah, he messed up. One bad choice. That's it. He let out a quiet breath. But it's never just one. He shifted slightly, wincing as his back pressed harder against the brick. I had a job. A real one. Office, clean desk. People actually listened when I talked. He gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. I used to complain about traffic. Can you believe that? Daniel didn't laugh. He just listened. Thomas nodded to himself, like he was confirming it was all real once. I worked in construction management. Not the guy with the hammer. The guy who made sure everything didn't fall apart before it was built. He paused. Funny, right? Not funny, Daniel said quietly. Thomas glanced at him, then looked away again. I had a house too. Small, but it was ours. His voice softened. Emily loved that place. The name hung in the air. Different from the rest. Careful. Fragile, Daniel noticed. Emily? He asked gently. Thomas nodded. My wife. A long pause followed. The kind that carries weight. She used to make coffee every morning, Thomas said, almost to himself. Strong. Way stronger than I liked. I'd complain, and she'd just smile like she already knew I'd drink it anyway. He let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Guess I always did. Daniel shifted slightly, still silent, giving him space. Thomas rubbed his hands together, like he was trying to warm something that wasn't there. We weren't rich, but we were. Okay, you know, bills paid, food on the table, plans for the future. He swallowed. We had plans. Daniel leaned forward a little. What kind of plans? Thomas hesitated, then shrugged. Normal ones. Travel someday. Maybe a small cabin somewhere quiet. She always wanted a dog. He shook his head. I said no. Too much responsibility. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared just as quickly. Funny thing is, I'd give anything for that responsibility now. Silence. The alley felt smaller somehow, like the past was pressing in. So what happened? Daniel asked carefully. Thomas didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened around the sandwich. You ever have a moment, he said slowly, where everything changes? But you don't realize it at first. Daniel nodded. Thomas let out a breath. It started with a call. His eyes drifted, unfocused now. I was at work. Just another day. Meetings, deadlines, complaints. About things that didn't really matter. He shook his head slightly. Phone rang. I almost ignored it. His jaw tightened. Almost? Daniel didn't interrupt. Thomas's voice dropped. It was the hospital. A pause. Emily had collapsed. The words landed heavy. Thomas swallowed hard, like, Even now they were difficult to say. I remember laughing, he said quietly. Not because it was funny, just disbelief. I kept thinking they had the wrong number. He shook his head again. They didn't. The alley went silent except for distant traffic. I got there as fast as I could, Thomas continued. Running through halls, bumping into people, I didn't care. I just needed to see her. His hands started to tremble slightly. They wouldn't let me in at first. Said they were still working on her. Said I had to wait. He looked at Daniel. You ever try waiting when the only thing that matters is on the other side of a door? Daniel's voice was quiet. Yeah. Thomas nodded slowly. Worst feeling in the world. He exhaled shakily. Time didn't move. It just sat there, mocking me. His eyes dropped to the ground. And then a doctor came out. He stopped. Just for a second, but it was enough to feel the shift. Daniel's posture changed slightly, more attentive now. Thomas's voice lowered. You can always tell, he said, before they even speak. It's in their face, in the way they walk. He clenched his jaw. I knew. A long silence followed. Daniel didn't rush him, didn't try to fill it. Thomas finally continued. They said it was sudden, something with her heart. Said they did everything they could. He laughed quietly, bitterly. They always say that, don't they? Daniel didn't respond. What could he say? Thomas looked up, eyes distant. 1 minute she was making coffee, he whispered. Next minute, she was gone. The word hung there. Gone. Simple. Final. Thomas pressed his lips together, trying to hold something back. After that, things didn't fall apart right away, he said. That would have been easier, honestly. He shifted, pulling his coat tighter. No, it was slower than that. Daniel watched him closely now. Like cracks in a wall, Thomas continued. You don't notice them at first. Then one day, the whole thing just collapses. He rubbed his face. I stopped sleeping. Couldn't focus. Work started slipping. Deadlines missed. Mistakes I never would have made before. He looked at Daniel. They don't tell you how grief works, you know. It's not just sadness. It's fog. Like your brain just quits on you. Daniel nodded slightly. I know. Thomas studied him for a second, like he was trying to see if that was true. Then he continued. My boss called me in one day. Said I needed to get back on track. He mimicked the tone, flat and distant. Said everyone goes through things, but business can't stop. He let out a breath. I tried. God, I tried. His voice cracked just slightly. But trying wasn't enough. He looked down again. They let me go 2 weeks later. Silence. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, but he stayed quiet. Thomas shrugged. Severance helped for a bit. Bills got paid. House stayed ours. For a while. He paused, then added quietly, but you can't outrun something when it's already inside you. Daniel leaned forward. What do you mean? Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph. Worn at the edges. He held it carefully like it might break. Daniel watched as Thomas turned it toward him. A younger Thomas. Clean. Standing straight. Beside him, a woman. Smiling. Bright eyes. Alive. That was us, Thomas said softly. Daniel looked at the photo, then back at him. She looks kind, he said. Thomas nodded. She was. A pause. Then, she trusted people too easily. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? Thomas stared at the photo longer this time. Then slowly, he flipped it over. On the back, faint handwriting. Daniel leaned in slightly, trying to see. Thomas hesitated. For a second, it looked like he might not show him. But then, he did. Daniel's eyes focused on the words. His expression changed. Subtly, but noticeably. Thomas noticed. Yeah, he said quietly. That's where things really started to go wrong. Daniel looked up. What is that? Thomas's jaw tightened. It's a name. A name of who? Thomas didn't answer right away. His fingers curled slightly around the photo. That, he said slowly, is the name of the man who destroyed everything I had left. The alley felt colder somehow. Daniel's voice dropped. What did he do? Thomas looked him straight in the eyes now, and for the first time, There was something different in his gaze. Not just sadness, not just exhaustion, something sharper. He didn't just take my job, Thomas said. He didn't just take my house. A pause. His grip tightened. He made sure I lost everything. Daniel held his stare. Why? Thomas leaned back against the wall, eyes dark now. Because I trusted him. Silence. Heavy, thick. Daniel's mind was already moving, connecting pieces. But here's the twist, Thomas added quietly. Daniel leaned in slightly. What? Thomas's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I wasn't supposed to find out the truth. Daniel frowned. What truth? Thomas stared at him for a long moment, then said, the truth about what he was really doing. Behind closed doors. A distant siren echoed somewhere in the city. Neither of them moved. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a story about loss anymore. It was something else, something bigger. And as Daniel looked at that name again, something in his expression shifted completely. Because deep down, he had a feeling. He'd heard that name before, but what Thomas said next changed everything. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. And that one moment was the reason he was sitting in that alley today. Thomas didn't look away this time. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel like he was finally done holding things back. You ever get that feeling, he said slowly, that you've stepped into something and there's no way out anymore? Daniel's jaw tightened just a little. Yeah, he said. I know that feeling. Thomas nodded, almost like he expected that answer. Well, that's exactly what happened to me. He shifted, adjusting the coat around his shoulders. The night air had gotten colder, but neither of them seemed to notice anymore. I wasn't supposed to be there that day, Thomas continued. That's the funny part. I stayed late at work, just trying to catch up, trying to prove I still had it together. He let out a dry breath. Building was almost empty. Lights off in most offices, just me, and the sound of my own thoughts. Daniel listened closely. And then I heard voices, Thomas said. A pause. Not loud, not arguing, just low, careful. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he could still see it. I didn't think much of it at first. Probably just someone else working late. But then I heard a name. Daniel leaned forward. What name? Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the photograph again. Then back up. The same one I just showed you. Daniel's expression tightened. Thomas continued. That's when I got curious. He shook his head slightly. No, not curious. That's not the right word. He exhaled. Uneasy? Daniel didn't interrupt. Thomas went on. The voice, it didn't sound right. You know how you can just tell? Like something's off, even if you can't explain it? Daniel nodded. I followed it. A simple sentence, but it carried weight. I walked down the hallway, slow. Didn't want to make noise. Didn't want them to know I was there. He paused. I don't even know why I did that. Maybe I should have just gone home. He looked at Daniel. But I didn't. Silence. I reached one of the conference rooms. Door was slightly open. Lights inside were dim. His voice dropped. And that's when I saw him. Daniel's eyes sharpened. The man from the photo? Thomas nodded. He was standing with two other people. Suits. Clean. Calm. Like it was just another business meeting. He swallowed. But it wasn't. Daniel leaned closer now. What were they doing? Thomas hesitated, then said quietly, money, transfers, accounts that didn't make sense, numbers that didn't match anything we were working on. Daniel's face changed. Not shock, recognition. Thomas caught it. You understand what I'm saying, he said. Daniel didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Thomas continued. I didn't stay long, just enough to realize, whatever that was, it wasn't legal. His voice grew tighter. And then, I made a mistake. Daniel's gaze locked onto him. What mistake? Thomas looked down, jaw clenched. I stepped back. A beat. My foot hit something. Silence. Daniel didn't need more. They heard you, he said. Thomas nodded slowly. Yeah. He let out a breath that sounded like it still haunted him. The room went quiet. Completely quiet. He tapped his fingers lightly against his knee. And then, the door opened. The alley seemed to shrink again. Thomas's voice lowered. He looked right at me. Daniel didn't move. Did he say anything? Thomas gave a faint, humorless smile. Oh yeah, he said. He did. A pause. Then, Thomas, he said, like we were old friends, like this was nothing. Daniel's brow furrowed. What did you do? Thomas laughed quietly. What could I do? I froze. Just stood there like an idiot. He shook his head. He walked up to me, calm, too calm. Thomas's fingers tightened. And then he said something I'll never forget. Daniel leaned in slightly. What? Thomas looked him straight in the eyes. You didn't see anything. Silence. Heavy. Cold. And I nodded, Thomas added. Like that was going to fix it. Like pretending was enough. Daniel exhaled slowly. But it wasn't. Thomas shook his head. No, it wasn't. He leaned back, staring up at the dark sky between the buildings. Next day, everything changed. Daniel's voice was low. How? Thomas let out a breath. Files went missing. Emails disappeared. Reports got twisted. He looked back at Daniel. And somehow, it all pointed to me. Daniel's eyes narrowed. They framed you. Thomas nodded. Perfectly. A bitter smile crossed his face. I went from Employee of the Month to the guy under investigation. Daniel clenched his jaw. Did you try to fight it? Thomas gave a quiet laugh. With what? I had no proof. Everything I saw. It was gone, clean, like it never happened. He paused. And they made sure I looked guilty. Daniel looked down briefly, thinking. Thomas continued. I lost my job, reputation. Friends stopped answering calls. People I worked with for years suddenly didn't know me. He swallowed. And the house. His voice softened. I couldn't keep up with the payments. Daniel didn't need the rest. You lost it. Thomas nodded. Yeah. A long silence followed. The kind that says everything without words. And that's how I ended up here, Thomas said finally, gesturing slightly around the alley. Not overnight. Not all at once, just piece by piece. Daniel sat still, processing everything. Then he asked, Why didn't you go to the police? Thomas looked at him like the answer was obvious. I tried. A pause. They didn't listen. Daniel's eyes narrowed again. Or they didn't want to. Thomas didn't say anything, but that silence said more than words. The city noise hummed faintly in the distance. For a moment, it felt like the world outside didn't exist. Just this alley, this story, and the truth sitting between them. Daniel finally spoke again. Thomas? His voice had changed. Less casual now, more focused. Do you still have anything? Any proof? Anything at all? Thomas hesitated. Then slowly, he reached into his coat again. Daniel watched closely. From inside, Thomas pulled out something small. Not the photo this time. Something else. A folded piece of paper. Worn. Carefully preserved. I kept this, Thomas said quietly. Didn't even know why at the time. Just felt important. He held it out. Daniel took it. Unfolded it slowly. His eyes scanned the page. And then he froze. Completely. Thomas noticed immediately. What? He asked. Daniel didn't answer. Not right away. His eyes moved across the paper again. Then back to the top. Reading. Rereading. Like he was making sure he wasn't imagining it. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Daniel, what is it? Daniel finally looked up. And for the first time since they met, there was no calm in his face. Just something sharp, serious, focused. This, Daniel said slowly, holding up the paper. This isn't just some random document. Thomas frowned. What do you mean? Daniel took a breath, then said, This is evidence. The word hit hard. Thomas blinked. Evidence of what? Daniel's grip tightened slightly. Of something much bigger than you think. Silence. Thomas stared at him. What are you talking about? Daniel leaned closer now, lowering his voice. Thomas, the name you showed me earlier. A pause. Thomas's chest tightened. What about it? Daniel held his gaze. I know who that is. Everything stopped. Right there. In that moment. Thomas's heart started to pound. What? Daniel didn't break eye contact. I've been looking for him. Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him. Looking? For him? Daniel nodded. For a long time. The alley suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. Why? Thomas asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel exhaled slowly, then said something that made Thomas's blood run cold. Because people connected to him. He paused. Don't just lose their jobs. Thomas's fingers curled slightly. What happens to them? Daniel's eyes didn't move. They disappear. Silence. Thick, unmoving. Thomas's breath caught. I disappear? Daniel nodded once. And you, he said quietly, are the first one I've found. Who didn't? Thomas stared at him. Mind racing? Nothing making sense anymore. And then, one thought hit him harder than anything else. If you've been looking for him, Thomas said slowly, then who are you? Daniel didn't answer right away. He just looked at him, really looked at him. Then finally, he said, I'm the reason you were found tonight. Thomas's stomach dropped. What does that mean? Daniel leaned in slightly, voice calm again, but different now. It means, this wasn't random. A pause. Thomas's heartbeat echoed in his ears. It means, Daniel continued, I've been watching you. Everything went silent. Because suddenly, this wasn't about the past anymore. It was about right now, and whatever came next was already in motion.